After years of construction, debate, and regional tension, Ethiopia has officially completed its mega infrastructure project, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, or GERD. Towering along the Blue Nile, this colossal structure now stands not only as a feat of engineering, but as a defining symbol of Ethiopia's national pride, ambition, and geopolitical awakening. With its massive turbines already spinning and water flowing at record capacity, GERD marks the dawn of a new era for Ethiopia and the broader East African region. The completion of this dam brings the potential for widespread energy access, economic independence, and a shift in the power dynamics across Africa's Horn, built to generate more than 6,000 megawatts of electricity. The dam is now the largest hydroelectric power plant on the continent. For Ethiopia, where more than half of the population lacked consistent access to electricity, this project promises to electrify homes, power industries, and unleash untapped economic growth. But the significance of GERD extends far beyond Ethiopia's borders. The dam sits on the Blue Nile, a river that flows downstream into Sudan and Egypt, which depend heavily on its waters for agriculture and daily life. This geography has made GERD not just a technical project, but a deeply political one, raising concerns, negotiations, and high-stakes diplomacy between nations. For years, Egypt feared the dam would reduce its water share, triggering warnings of conflict and endless rounds of international talks. Ethiopia, on the other hand, has insisted on its sovereign right to utilize its natural resources and develop its economy. Now that the dam is fully operational, it sends a strong message. Ethiopia is ready to lead, and it will no longer wait for outside approval to pursue its development. Internally, the mood is triumphant. Across Ethiopia, citizens have celebrated the milestone as a moment of national unity. Many Ethiopians, including those in the diaspora, contributed financially to the dam's construction through bond purchases and donations. The project became more than just concrete and steel. It became a collective dream, symbol of hope, and a rallying point for a people often divided by politics and ethnicity. Economically, GERD could be transformative. Ethiopia now has the potential not only to become self-sufficient in energy, but to export surplus electricity to neighboring countries such as Sudan, Kenya, Djibouti, and Eritrea. These power exports could bring in millions of dollars in revenue, helping reduce debt, improve infrastructure, and attract foreign investment. It also positions Ethiopia as a regional power broker in energy and water policy. Still, challenges remain. Operational management of the dam, environmental sustainability, and continued diplomatic friction with Egypt will need careful handling. The Nile Basin is a delicate ecosystem and shared resource, and Ethiopia's success will also depend on how it navigates cooperation and transparency with its neighbors. But one thing is clear. With GERD now complete, Ethiopia has shifted the balance. No longer content with being seen as a developing country dependent on aid, Ethiopia is asserting itself as a modern African power capable of building, leading, and setting its own course for the future. The dam may have been born out of necessity, but its completion signals ambition, tells a story of resilience, determination, and the will of a nation to rise against odds. Ethiopia has turned a page in its history. The ripple effects of this dam will be felt for generations. Ethiopia's Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, it's commonly known as GERD, is now fully operational, a development that represents not only a massive engineering achievement, but also a defining moment in African infrastructure history. Constructed across the Blue Nile River in the Benishangul-Gumuz region, this colossal hydroelectric project has transformed from blueprint to reality. After more than a decade of planning, construction, negotiations, and national sacrifice, with all its turbines installed and power generation capacity now exceeding 6,000 megawatts, GERD is poised to change the energy landscape of not just Ethiopia, but the entire East African region. The dam's full operation brings to life one of the most ambitious infrastructure projects ever undertaken on the African continent. GERD is now officially the largest hydroelectric power plant in Africa and the 7th largest in the world. This megastructure stretches approximately 1.8 kilometers wide and stands 145 meters tall, holding a reservoir capable of storing over 74 billion cubic meters of water. Its successful completion signifies a powerful symbol of Ethiopia's vision to emerge as a continental leader and to harness its natural resources in a sustainable way that benefits its people and the broader region. For Ethiopia, GERD's operational status represents years of perseverance and self-reliance. Despite facing pressure from international financial institutions and foreign governments that raised concerns over the dam's potential geopolitical impacts, Ethiopia remained determined to fund the project domestically. Ethiopians from all walks of life, civil servants, business owners, farmers, and students contributed financially through bond purchases, voluntary donations, and national campaigns. In many ways, GERD became more than a dam. It became a symbol of unity, resistance, and national pride. Its completion is a tribute to the collective willpower of a country determined to rise above economic hardship and build its future with its own hands. Technically, the dam's completion involved complex engineering challenges. From geological stabilization to state-of-the-art turbine installation and the safe management of water flows in a dynamic river basin. Engineers, planners, and construction crews worked under intense pressure, often navigating logistical, environmental, and political complications. The structure incorporates modern control systems, environmental safeguards, and advanced hydroelectric mechanisms designed to optimize efficiency while minimizing ecological disruption. With full operational status, all 13 turbines are now spinning at full capacity, feeding thousands of megawatts into Ethiopia's national grid and market. A new era of energy abundance for a country long plagued by electricity shortages and power blackouts. The impact of this milestone is already being felt across Ethiopia. For decades, millions of Ethiopians lived without reliable access to electricity, with entire regions depending on diesel generators or simply going without power. The operational GERD will drastically expand access to electricity across rural and urban areas, powering homes, schools, hospitals, businesses, and factories. Reliable electricity supply will improve educational outcomes, healthcare services, and industrial productivity. It will stimulate job creation, support entrepreneurship, and open new pathways for technological innovation beyond Ethiopia's borders. The dam's completion signals a shift in regional infrastructure development strategy. GERD is a homegrown project that defied the traditional dependency on Western lenders and driven models. By completing the dam largely through domestic funding and local contractors, Ethiopia has demonstrated that African nations can conceive, finance, and execute world-class infrastructure projects on their own terms. This model may serve as a blueprint for other countries seeking greater autonomy in their development agendas. GERD's fully operational status also has significant implications for regional cooperation and integration. With the ability to produce massive amounts of electricity, Ethiopia now has the capacity to export power to neighboring countries such as Sudan, Kenya, Djibouti, and potentially even Egypt. These energy exports could create stronger economic ties, reduce energy poverty, and promote cross-border collaboration in the Horn of Africa. In a region often marked by conflict and political instability, shared energy resources could become a powerful force for peace and mutual benefit. Still, GERD's completion also brings to the forefront unresolved diplomatic tensions, particularly with downstream countries Egypt and Sudan. Both nations depend heavily on Nile waters for agriculture, drinking water, and economic activity. Egypt, in particular, has voiced concerns that Ethiopia's unilateral operation of the dam could reduce water flow and threaten its water security. While Ethiopia has repeatedly assured that the dam will not significantly harm downstream nations and is designed to manage flows responsibly, the absence of a legally binding agreement remains a point of contention. Full operational status now raises the urgency for finalizing cooperative frameworks and data sharing mechanisms to prevent potential water disputes in the future. The milestone also draws global attention to Africa's potential as a center of clean clean energy innovation. In an era of climate change and rising demand for sustainable power solutions, GERD stands as a powerful example of how African nations can lead in renewable energy development. The dam is expected to prevent millions of tons of carbon emissions annually by displacing fossil fuel energy, contributing to both Ethiopia's and the continent's green transition goals. For Ethiopia, GERD's completion represents more than just power generation. It's a defining moment in national history, one that reflects a deep commitment to progress, sovereignty, and long-term development. As the turbines continue to generate energy day and night, they also generate momentum for industry, for diplomacy, and for a narrative in which African countries no longer wait for permission to build their futures. The completion of Ethiopia's Grand Renaissance Dam marks a monumental turning point for East Africa's energy future. The structure is now capable of generating over 6,000 megawatts of electricity. This staggering power output isn't just a technical marvel, it's a transformative force poised to reshape the economic destiny of Ethiopia and its regional neighbors. With the dam now fully operational, Ethiopia stands on the brink of becoming the primary energy hub of East Africa, bringing both direct benefits to its population and strategic leverage across national borders at over 6,000 megawatts. GERD surpasses any other energy facility on the African continent in capacity. This output will more than double Ethiopia's existing electricity supply, instantly shifting the country from one that has struggled for decades with frequent power outages to a potential exporter of energy. The power from GERD can electrify entire regions that have lived in darkness, powering homes, hospitals, schools, and businesses with consistent renewable energy. In a nation where nearly half of the population lacked reliable access to electricity before the dam's construction. This leap represents far more than convenience. It signals a foundational improvement in quality of life. Electricity is more than just a utility, it's an economic multiplier. With an abundant and stable energy supply, Ethiopia can now aggressively pursue industrialization. Manufacturing facilities, tech hubs, and service centers will find new life in an environment where power outages no longer disrupt production. Local entrepreneurs can expand operations without the constant burden of generator costs. And foreign investors will view Ethiopia as a more stable and predictable place to do business. The presence of low-cost, renewable energy will attract industries seeking to reduce carbon footprints and minimize operational costs. The ripple effects extend to agriculture, one of Ethiopia's primary economic sectors. With consistent power, irrigation systems can run more reliably, food processing can scale, and cold storage facilities can preserve perishable goods longer, dramatically reducing waste and increasing food security. In rural regions, where the connection to the national grid has historically been limited, the power generated by GERD could support small-scale industries, enhance education through technology, and power essential health infrastructure. Clinics that once operated by candlelight or diesel fuel will now be able to maintain refrigeration for medicine, power life-saving equipment, and provide better care overall, beyond Ethiopia's borders. The impact of GERD's power generation is already drawing attention. East African nations, including Sudan, Djibouti, Kenya, potentially Eritrea, are set to benefit from electricity exports through regional power pool agreements. This cross-border energy trade has the potential to generate substantial foreign revenue for Ethiopia while simultaneously strengthening regional cooperation and reducing dependency on expensive fossil fuels. Countries with seasonal or inadequate energy supplies will gain access to a stable, green source of electricity, further enabling regional development and economic integration. This shift in energy access also realigns power dynamics within East Africa. Ethiopia, long seen as a landlocked nation with limited export options, now possesses an asset that gives it both soft and hard influence. Energy diplomacy can be used to forge alliances, support infrastructure integration, and enhance Ethiopia's standing in multilateral negotiations. The ability to offer electricity at scale gives Addis Ababa a strong card to play in bilateral relationships, particularly with countries that are energy import dependent. This newfound influence could be leveraged to build infrastructure corridors, expand trade agreements, and shape the policy future of the Horn of Africa. Importantly, represents not only energy, but renewable, clean energy. At a time when the world is looking to transition away from fossil fuels, the dam provides a climate-resilient model for African development. The 6,000 megawatt output will displace millions of tons of carbon emissions annually by reducing the region's reliance on diesel generators and coal-fired power plants. This positions Ethiopia as a contributor to global environmental goals and opens up the potential for climate financing, green bonds, and other forms of sustainable investment. Even more critical is the fact that this energy comes from a domestically managed source. Ethiopia is not dependent on foreign oil, external gas pipelines, or imported coal. Instead, it has harnessed the natural flow of the Blue Nile to power its ambitions. This energy independence reduces vulnerability to global price shocks and supply disruptions, while also reinforcing national sovereignty. Ethiopia will no longer be beholden to international energy markets and can plan its future with greater financial and political autonomy. Infrastructure also tends to have compounding benefits. The construction of transmission lines, substations, and local distribution networks to support GERT's output will create thousands of jobs and stimulate local economies. Technical expertise developed through the dam project can be applied to other sectors. Young engineers, technicians, and scientists trained during the GERT era are now part of a new generation of African professionals capable of leading future development. While challenges will remain, including maintaining the infrastructure, managing water levels responsibly, negotiating regional water sharing agreements, the benefits of GERT's power capacity cannot be overstated. It represents a generational shift in how energy is produced, distributed, and consumed in East Africa. In many ways, GERT is more than a dam. It's a cornerstone of Ethiopia's and East Africa's economic future, one built not just from concrete and turbines, but from the collective aspiration to rise, develop, and lead. The completion of Ethiopia's grand Ethiopian Renaissance. Dam GERT has not only transformed the physical landscape of East Africa, but also redefined the geopolitical equilibrium of the region. As the largest hydroelectric dam in Africa becomes fully operational, it represents far more than an energy milestone. GERT is now a symbol of Ethiopian sovereignty and national determination. It asserts Addis Ababa's right to control and utilize its own natural resources and has sparked renewed tensions and diplomatic recalculations involving downstream nations like Egypt and Sudan. This project, which has been under global scrutiny for over a decade, has triggered a reconfiguration of power in the Nile Basin and beyond. At the heart of this geopolitical shift is water. The most vital and contested resource in the region, the Blue Nile, originating in Ethiopia, contributes nearly 85% of the water that flows into the Nile River, which sustains tens of millions of lives in Egypt and Sudan. Over a century, colonial-era treaties, including those signed in 1929 and 1959, granted Egypt and Sudan disproportionate control over the Nile waters. Ethiopia, despite being the source of most of the river's volume, was excluded from these agreements. GERT is now Ethiopia's answer to that historical exclusion. By controlling the flow of water through the dam, Ethiopia has effectively rewritten the balance of power over the Nile. The assertion of this control has triggered serious diplomatic challenges. Egypt, which depends on the Nile for over 90% of its freshwater needs, has long expressed deep concerns over GERT. Egyptian officials have framed the dam as a threat to their national water security, warning that any significant reduction in downstream flow could disrupt agriculture, industry, and domestic supply. Sudan, situated between Ethiopia and Egypt, has taken a more nuanced stance at times, supportive of the dam's potential benefits, such as flood control and cheaper electricity, and at other times wary of its potential risks if coordination is not guaranteed. Ethiopia, on the other hand, has consistently emphasized its sovereign right to develop its natural resources for the benefit of its people. Ethiopian leaders have argued that GERD is not intended to harm any nation, but to lift millions of Ethiopians out of poverty through access to clean, renewable electricity. With over 6,000 megawatts of capacity, the dam offers Ethiopia a path to industrialization, electrification, and economic independence. The country has insisted that its water usage is reasonable and sustainable, pointing to international studies and modeling data to justify the dam's operation. This diplomatic standoff has played out in international arenas for years. The African Union, United Nations, and the United States have all attempted to mediate negotiations, often unsuccessfully. Egypt has pushed for a legally binding agreement on water release schedules, while Ethiopia prefers a more flexible, non-binding framework that respects its sovereignty. Despite rounds of talks, the dispute remains unresolved. The dam's completion has heightened the urgency of reaching an agreement. The window for negotiation is narrowing as GERD moves from a construction site to a functioning piece of critical infrastructure beyond the direct water concerns. GERD has become a focal point in broader conversations about power and identity in Africa. For Ethiopia, completing GERD is a national triumph, a project funded largely through domestic contributions without major international loans or donor dependency. It represents an assertion of African capability, defying the traditional narrative. That major infrastructure must be backed by foreign entities. In this light, GERD has become a symbol of post-colonial assertion, not just against former European powers, but also against regional arrangements seen as unjust or outdated. The dam's strategic implications extend beyond just the Nile Basin. Its success challenges other African nations to rethink their development models and pursue large-scale projects on their own terms. It also sends a clear message to global powers. Africa is capable of shaping its own future, even in the face of diplomatic pressure. For countries like Egypt that have long wielded disproportionate influence over regional water politics, GERD introduces a new, more balanced reality, one where upstream countries like Ethiopia demand a seat at the table in recognition of their rights. The dynamic between Ethiopia, Egypt, and Sudan is also reflective of broader geopolitical alignments. Egypt's close ties with Western and Gulf powers have contrasted with Ethiopia's increasing engagement with China, Russia, and other non-Western actors. GERD has at times become a diplomatic litmus test, with various nations signaling support for one side or the other, based on broader strategic interests. This has added an extra layer of complexity to an already tense situation, making the dam not only a regional issue, but a point of interest for global diplomacy. Internally, the dam has also bolstered national unity within Ethiopia, despite ethnic divisions and political challenges. GERD became a unifying project, one that transcended internal disagreements and fostered a collective vision of national progress. The government's ability to complete the dam despite economic and political instability has boosted its credibility and strengthened its negotiating position on the world stage. In Sudan, GERD has been a source of both opportunity and risk. The country stands to gain from regulated water flows and cheaper electricity. It also fears being left out of crucial decision-making processes. Sudanese officials have stressed the need for clear data-sharing agreements and coordination during droughts or emergency water releases. Without such coordination, GERD could alter river flow patterns in ways that disrupt agriculture or damage infrastructure downstream as the dam begins full-scale operations. Regional leaders will face mounting pressure to resolve these disputes through diplomacy rather than confrontation. The growing interdependence created by shared water and energy systems means that cooperation is not just ideal, but essential. Ethiopia's completion of GERD marks the beginning of a new era where the historical imbalance of power over the Nile must evolve to accommodate the rights and aspirations of all basin countries. The coming years will determine whether GERD becomes a source of division or a catalyst for a more equitable and sustainable future in the region. If you're excited to see Africa rise, take control of its resources, and reshape its future on its own terms, then don't.